Hello, this is Jeff Nyquist with another edition of Friends and Enemies. I'm in the United States. My co-host Alex Benesch is in Germany. We discuss Friends and Enemies. That is the idea, the main idea of politics. The center of politics is to be able to tell your friends from enemies. It's a main idea of international politics too. And of course, we had an incident this past week in the United States where one of the leaders of Turning Point USA, Charlie Kirk, was shot in the neck and killed by a sniper, who now the governor of Utah, this happened at Utah University, University of Utah, and UVU, and the Governor Cox of Utah has now said that this kid that shot him, allegedly, but they have a lot of evidence, his name is
Tyler Robinson.
Tyler Robinson. Yeah, Tyler Robinson, that he had very left-wing views, but he was raised in a conservative home. His father is a sheriff in Washington County, Utah, the other end of the state from where the shooting took place. I guess a 3.5 hour drive, the governor said. And so we have an ideological crime, a political killing, assassination. And of course, Charlie Kirk was 31 years old, extremely talented, by the way, brilliant. I didn't agree with his views on foreign policy, but he was a good person. People loved him. People also hated him, as we can see. And of course, shot dead tragically here a couple days back, actually on Wednesday, 3 days ago. Because we're doing this on Saturday, just causing all kinds of angst and anguish by people, especially conservatives, who are very upset here in this country. And of course, you have rabble-rousers, right-wing pro-Russian rabble-rousers, like Alexander Dugin, the Russian manipulator, who says, we need a civil war in America, and we need a world civil war where Russia and MAGA unite. And of course, you have Alex Jones saying, this is war, this is war, this is war. And you have a lot of people, I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Laura Loomer, saying things like this. The agitation is extreme. Chuck Schumer in the Senate from the left, being very measured and statesmanlike, saying we need to unite. This is, of course, the correct thing. You need to unite. You can't have a civil war in America. The entire world would crash and burn if you had a civil war in America. But here we are. And the Governor Cox, Governor Spencer Cox of Utah, at the press conference yesterday with Kash Patel, the head of the FBI, made a very impassioned, beautiful speech about unity, about treating this properly, thinking about this properly. And this doesn't happen in America. And why did this happen? And he had hoped it wouldn't happen in the state of Utah, and it did. And it was one of their citizens, and it was from a guy from a conservative home. This assassin, Tyler Robinson's father, turned him in, or was one of the people that turned him in. This is so tragic. I mean, your own son turns against your own teachings, is flipped to a radical, shoots a conservative on a campus. A guy, I mean, Charlie Kirk is a guy who said, here, show me where I'm wrong. He would debate. He would discuss. He was a brilliant debater, by the way. This is a guy that could have been a future president in the Republican Party. I mean, he was a big, tall, good-looking guy, very, very articulate. I mean, he was a future leader on the right in the United States, shot down. I mean, horrific crime. And Alex, if you're in Europe, this is like the 60s. I think Governor Cox said this. I had said this before. We had all these assassinations in the 60s. It was a rising violence of the 1960s, the Vietnam War, the Kent State massacre, all the sit-ins, all the riots. The Watts riot in LA. You had rioting all over the place. And just like we've had now in this last few years, and now, 2 assassination attempts on President Trump. Trump was shot in the ear in one of the attempts. And now this, and you've had violence also against people on the left as well as the right. You're sitting in another country, Alex. I mean, how do you see this? What does this make you feel about America that you hear this news?
Well, we've seen this before. I mean, we had this terror group once. This terrorist group once, the RAF, the Red Army faction, and they conducted a mix of different types of terror attacks. So it was bombings, it was sniper killings, it was gunning people down in the street, or riding a motorbike and just at the right moment stopping and just spraying the target person with bullets who was sitting in his car. We also had kidnappings. This is more complicated to pull off. This leftist group, they would grab somebody who was in politics, conservative politics, or they would be from a weapons manufacturer or something. Grab this person and have sort of a mock trial, or they would use them as leverage to free some of their comrades out of prison. The hijacking of airplanes, again making demands. They want this, that, and the other. I mean, it was a crazy time. It was a campaign. We don't know if this is going to be a campaign in the U.S., but it could be. And when this campaign happened to us, West Germany, in the Cold War, it completely changed people's perspective, and people's daily lives. And it sort of. It was sort of gauged to make people take sides. When the RAF was at its height, and there was these people underground still trying to conduct terror attacks, and the government was trying to catch them. When that went on, this group had millions of sympathizers, but these sympathizers only in very rare cases would actually help these terrorists. But if you would have had more active helpers, that would have been a much more massive problem, and the government would have had to react in a much more massive way. Okay, so we're talking possible martial law, soldiers on the street, and who knows what else. Maybe speed trials. I mean, this happens in states of emergency when people get caught helping terrorists, then they would go to a speed trial. You wouldn't have this big show thing where it takes months and months to convict somebody and blah, blah, blah. You would just do it on the spot real quick. But because if you have more active helpers, they can provide a place to hide the guns. They would provide a cover address. They would provide all the things that terrorists need. Now, as it seems at this point, this creature, Tyler Robinson, who's not convicted yet, we refer to him as the suspect or the main suspect. It doesn't seem like at this point that Tyler Robinson had a professional network. He was kind of making things up in his plan. He was writing stuff on Discord. He wasn't wearing a proper disguise. People recognized him on the photos, the still frames, and I think he's worn these shoes before. You could see that he was very lean. So usually professionals would try to disguise themselves much, much more. I mean, nowadays you have like these super masks that look very, very realistic, and you can just apply them fairly quickly, change your appearance, and you could just take them off, rip them off, and burn them. But this guy didn't disguise that he was lean. This guy didn't properly disguise his face other than wearing glasses. He was hiding a rifle, then he was writing on Discord that he somehow had to retrieve the rifle, and blah blah blah. It was very strange and amateurish, even though he was described as a bright student who could have a big college degree and make money in the future and have a successful life. It was very, very it seemed very downright moronic how he did this. And that's kind of like where we're at right now. He doesn't, with the limited information that we have, he doesn't fit any of the standard profiles. Even before we had this main suspect under arrest, I wrote a text and said that, okay, it could be the killer, could be from baseline categories. It could be like the lone ideological terrorist. He could be within a group that's more professional and ideological, and they want direct action. Or it could be somebody from attached to a foreign government, attached to some intelligence group who's doing this as a job, as a mission. So it's like the most baseline categories. And so now we get this guy, and as you said, conservative upbringing. He drove a muscle car, and I mean he would spend a lot of time on the internet, which sometimes warps people's minds quite a bit. And he would he would be someone you would expect a career from. You know, he's Gen Z. I think he's still considered Generation Gen Z, but he was broke. Okay, like it was usual for young people. Z. Yeah. So he was kind of broke.
As a boomer, Gen Z. That's after. I'm a boomer. Yeah, 1958 was originally the last year of the baby boom, and I was born in 1958, so I'm technically a boomer. But Gen Z, could you explain the difference between a millennial and a Gen Z, or is this terminology?
You were born in what year again?
1958.
1958. So I was born in 1984, and I'm pretty much in between, or almost in between, Gen X and millennials. I mean, some millennials are in their 40s now. So and it's kind of a real thing because
and
we
Gen
have different.
Z is people born after 2000. Is the definition?
I think it's after 2000 for sure. I mean,
okay. So he was born around 2000. For him to be 22, he'd be born around.
Yeah, and it's
2000.
like, I mean, people make all sorts of categoric statements about these different generations, and they try to get people to hate each other. But there's differences because we have different experiences, and some generations they still had to fight in the big wars, and then they. In later generations, they didn't necessarily have that, and so there's differences, of course. And I think older generations were kind of considering it normal to be kind of broke when you were young, and you had to work hard.
Well, that was the way it was for me. In fact, I've been broke most of my life, but I this is what I will say about the generations. And younger people might not like this. I noticed this because I had to work a regular job. I had to be a contractor, and I interacted with the younger generation. And I was always stunned by the absenteeism. And I was an employer in the 90s, by the way. I literally fired everybody under 30 that I ever hired. Nobody that was under the age of 30 ever worked out working for me. They couldn't, and these jobs were fairly easy, but they just required you to show up. I owned a security company in Southern California for several years.
Yep.
And, the most important thing about a security guard is they have to show up. So I was running security guards at different, timeshare resorts, shopping centers, businesses, factories. I had to have reliable people because if they didn't show up, I had to go in. And I couldn't, it got to be, I had like 20 employees at the peak of the company. And so it was a lot to manage. 20 people is a lot to manage. And luckily I had a partner who was very solid. We were very well organized. We were good at organizing and dealing with people, but everybody under 30. Now this is 30 years ago now, the mid 90s. Yep. Everybody under 30 we had to fire because they didn't show up. They would sleep on the job. They would goof. They would do things. Some of them would steal, which was really horrible. If one of our we had one of our employees actually stealing, and we had to do a sting on our own employee because we began to suspect it, right?
Yeah.
So this is like, you can't have security people who steal.
And
these are people who are FBI background checked, by the way. You can't have people without an FBI background check. And so this is in the 90s. But then I saw it getting worse. And of course, I taught school in the 80s, in the early 90s. I taught high school and university level. And I saw that I began teaching in 85 or 86? I think it was 85. I started with student teaching. And the students in the high schools, they were completely different animals. Because I graduated in 1976. So from 1976 to 85, they were different animals, completely different. They basically cheated. Cheating was completely normalized. They didn't want to do any work. There would be 3 or 4 students out of 33. The average class size was about 33. There'd be 3 or 4 that would do the homework and were like good kids. Although they were all, in a way, good kids. I mean, a lot of good-natured kids. But they just didn't want to do the assignments. They didn't want to study.
Yeah.
They would complain that was too hard when I would give them assignments that for like 11th grade or 12th grade should be easy. The level should have been easy. And what was interesting is the other teachers said, oh, they can't do that. That's too hard. It's like, these kids have actually trained you to believe that they are incapable. And when I would get the students to do something, that they would say, oh, we can't believe you got them to write an essay.
And it's not right? like previous generations had all Stockholm syndrome. I mean, people back then, they knew it's not pleasant to work many hours, not get paid a lot of money. Of course, we know it's not fun, and things should be better, and we know about centralization of power with some mega corporations and offshore tax havens and all that. And I'll get to my my notes later about my London trip and seeing all the exhibits on the British Empire directly. So it's like even previous generations, they knew that hard work isn't pleasant per se, and you needed stamina. You needed stamina. You need to do this for a long time, and you can't make a serious mistake. You can't have trouble with the law. You can mess up. Even one mistake can ruin your trajectory.
Absolutely.
And so when this. But nowadays, I see a lot of resentment in Gen Z. It's like, as you said, everything is so unfair, and the past, these elites and the corporations and the politics. And
wokeism is narcissistic. It's a narcissistic formula.
And it's tough for people, for young people, to decide where to stand ideologically, because I see some of these younger adults, and they have to be sort of on the left or pretend to be on the left to get girls because they're mostly on the left. But at the same time, look at them and I'm like, okay, you look totally Nordic. You're some of these guys that I see on a regular basis, they like the Nordic types, and they actually like masculinity. They want to be masculine. They want to have things. They want to impress women with the cars that they have and possessions that they have.
I drove I bought my first car at 17. It was a 1969 Dodge Charger with a 440 cubic inch engine. I got to admit, I was bad with that car. I would never drive like that. That was stupid. And kids are stupid. But you had in LA, where I grew up in that part of my life when I was in high school and early college, I had to work. And I'll give you an example. When I was a sophomore in college, I had a full load, and I worked 72 hours a week at 2 jobs. And I bought my car with my own money. And in order to keep that car, I had to make a certain amount of money. And that was and of course, I thought it was rough. My parents were very hard on me. They said I was a slacker. I was working 72 hours a week.
But that's a different standard, right?
Right. It's a different standard. So you got to understand, you think it was easy? I worked very hard from the time I was, 16 years old and I could get a work permit. You're working, kid. And going to college and getting a degree, and then not really having a good job when I got out of college, because it was the recession when Reagan came in. They raised interest rates. A lot of companies were pulling back on hiring. So it was this is what I went through, and I was a sissy compared to my grandparents. I have a friend who when he asked his parents were sitting around and they were looking at these kids now. This is just a few years ago, and he asked his parents. They were praising their grandkids, and he said, "But these kids are really growing up soft."
Who are these wussies?
Yeah, these kids are growing up soft. Now, my buddy, he grew up in the south side of Chicago in a rough neighborhood, and he said these kids are growing up soft. And they said, yeah. And he said, are you? And of course, his dad, fought at Peleliu and Okinawa, and was a World War II veteran, right? This is tough, right? Grew up in the Depression. His dad grew up just like my dad grew up in the Depression. So he said, now I'm a sissy compared to you growing up in the Depression and fighting World War II. And what about your parents? How tough were your parents? That is a generation born, just before 1900. How tough were they? And his dad, the World War II veteran, admitted that his dad was much tougher than he was. So you see, the grandparents and were tougher than the parents who fought World War II, right?
Yeah.
And then the kids, even growing up in a rough neighborhood in Chicago, are tougher than most kids in America in the boomer generation. And then you get to the next generation, it's like, these kids are impossibly soft. They expect everything on a platter. And of course, when I look at the resentment of this kid who shot Charlie Kirk, such a talented individual, I gotta say, I'm angry.
Yeah, and
I'm angry about this.
We don't have the exact details yet, but I'm assuming, or I'm leaning towards the assumption that the suspect, Tyler Robinson, the suspicion that he was kind of broke. He was a student. We learned from the media that he was a 4.0 high school student. I don't even know exactly what that means, but super grades, won a prestigious college scholarship according to social media posts. It's not 100% confirmed. His options are endless, his mother wrote on Facebook. So presumably he arrived at university with a scholarship worth $32,000 over 4 years, but he wasn't there long. Utah State said he attended the school for just one semester. And then the Los Angeles Times, I believe it was, says the following. This is the Los Angeles Times. They give us some more bits. They give us some more bits about his college time. They say he later attended Dixie Technical College, where school officials said he was in his third year of study in the electrical apprenticeship program. So
he was studying to be an electrician, is that right?
Electrical apprenticeship program. So I mean, it's not a leftist subject. He wasn't going to university studying Marxism.
He did go to university for one semester, which is enough to completely turn your head, right?
Yeah, but he picked like a subject that was more real world and technical, something you would expect from a more conservative person. He wasn't studying literature.
Was there a union involved in recruiting him to that?
I'm not sure.
Do you think there could have been?
I'm not sure,
Yeah,
but it's not like he's your standard wokey who would study Marxism or literature or something, which is kind of baffling. And they said he drove a muscle car, which he probably got from his father, I assume. So in all probability, he did not.
By the way, by my generation, that isn't a real muscle car. By the standards of that thing is just a.
So it's likely that he didn't have money. Okay, and he would be looking at more study, finishing his degree, then get
which
an
is
entry-level
normal,
job.
which is normal
Yeah.
for 22 years old.
Then
I had
in
no
the
money when
current-
I was 22.
In the current job market, he would then have to get an entry-level job, which is not paid well, and then he would have to work his way up, eventually maybe being able to live somewhat comfortably and having enough to raise a family, maybe, right? So that's kind of the assumption at this point. Now, so if we assume he was broke, and we know Gen Z is having a hard time in the job market for various reasons. So he would be looking at a life of, this would be hard, and maybe he didn't want to make all this effort anymore, and he kills a person. He kills someone who has a lot of things that he did not have. So Charlie Kirk had money, a family, status, an audience, powerful connections to politics, and all the things that Tyler Robinson did not have. So maybe that plays a role in this. And it's like maybe he was one of the young kids who couldn't really decide, do I like Leninism more, revolutionary terrorist Leninism more, or maybe I'm trying this, maybe I should try some brand of ultra right wing. Maybe he wasn't really sure, and we don't have his full online history yet, so it's kind of hard to say at the moment if he was, flip-flopping and trying out different things, and then he finally settled on this assassination, and it's one bullet that hit, causing all these reverberations around the world. And usually, if you pick a target like this, this could escalate things. This could lead to other attacks, either copycat or retaliatory attacks. I mean, we saw this. I mean, this was even on mainstream news, I think, in all over the world. I think I saw a clip from Sky News Australia, I think it was. This is owned by the Murdoch media group, so conservative, very, very powerful. And they showed these clips of asking people on the street, young people, quite a few women, what do you think about the assassination of Charlie Kirk? And a lot of the responses were, it's great, that's a good day, and blah, 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 blah. So you could expect retaliatory attacks, then this could go back and forth, kind of like what these ultra right-wingers used to believe when they were reading this novel, The Turner Diaries, where a terrorist strategy, ramps up to a civil war, and then the right-wingers win. And I also, before we had this suspect in custody, I mean, obviously I was talking about the different types or categories of killers of that fashion, or terrorists of that fashion. And I also gave out one possibility, besides the regular ones, and that would be the category of the professional destabilizer. This sort of terrorist is either a professional working for private customers or foreign governments, or he has been coached by professionals who remain in the dark and keep minimal ties that cannot be traced. The ultimate motive is destabilization of the target population, expecting retaliatory attacks. So we don't know if somebody offered money to this killer. This guy that's now in prison, maybe somebody offered him money and said, oh, you can make this work, you can escape, you can hide your tracks, hide the gun and have a disguise, and then we'll promise you a bunch of money and maybe a Russian passport, or who knows what else. I mean, doesn't this remind you a little bit of the first attempted assassination by Lee Harvey Oswald, when he was trying to sniper kill a senator from Texas, this politician from Texas, this right winger, and he missed, and Oswald missed. And he got this, and Oswald, he's been a communist since his teenage days. Oswald always wanted to be this revolutionary hero conducting assassinations, and then his exit plan was to go to Cuba or the Soviet Union, being celebrated as a hero, giving lectures, being rich and famous and all that. Right. So this is kind of like the possibilities that exist. And I also gave 2 historical examples. We talk about targeted killings that have political ramifications and that sort of thing. One case, this is from the Cold War, very famous over here, of course. The left-wing West Berlin student Benno Ohnesorg was shot dead by West Berlin police officer Karl-Heinz Kurras in 1967 during a demonstration against the visit of the Shah of Iran. And this police officer was considered to be very, very right-wing. This caused a significant radicalization in Germany across all political camps, which played into Moscow's hands. In 2009, Stasi files revealed that Mr. Kurras was a secret SED party member, Communist Party member, and an unofficial employee of East Germany's spy service, the Ministry for State Security, also known as the Stasi. It has not been proven whether Mr. Kurras intentionally committed murder on behalf of the Stasi, but we can, of course, speculate. And a photographer from the communist or East communist propaganda newspaper Wahrheit, that means truth, took the famous photo of the dead Ohnesorg. So at the right moment, at the right place, this guy is there, shoots the photo, and this becomes like a big deal in the media. A certain Alfred Menschel, a medical assistant with communist connections, also happened to be at the scene and treated the man. The Stasi obtained a copy of the court records in lightning time, had the opportunity to shape propaganda. And Mr. Kurras had declared in writing to the Stasi that he considered the Eastern path to be the right policy. Although he lacked the typical Marxist-Leninist training, he consumed books from the East. So this guy had a real right-wing background, but then he became a leftist. So he had one foot in both worlds. Like maybe this guy that's the suspect now in the Kirk shooting. A similar case, or another case of a dead influencer. Another case, major case, was that of Rudi Dutschke. And so he was originally a citizen of Eastern Germany, the communist part of Germany, but he chose to flee to the West and lived as a college student until the age of 33, but his career as a professional lecturer or author never materialized. Instead, he became an influencer, wanted to promote socialist revolutions worldwide, using force if necessary, yet he disliked the USSR. So then there was an assassination attempt against him in 1968. Assassination attempt carried out by the right-winger Josef Bachmann. But Bachmann's group, however, was said to have contacts with the Stasi, which was not that unusual because the communists were trying to infiltrate the extreme right-wing. So again, you had a whole bunch of, in Germany, Europe, France, Italy, you had all kinds of, super right-wing groups. Right-wing groups who were starting to work with the communists, even though that's, kind of moronic. And so Moscow deeply despised all left-wing movements that did not accept Moscow's leadership. Assassination attempts on prominent dissidents like Trotsky in exile were planned long in advance. And there was an informant in the leftist student group SDS, that's like Students for Democratic Society. We had the same over here. This informant reported to the East Berlin Ministry for State Security, the Stasi, at that time that Dutschke represented a completely anarchist position. Dutschke Dutschke spoke exclusively of horrible socialism in the East. The Eastern Bloc was in a panic about democratization movements at the time. And so, it would have made sense for the Stasi or the KGB to kill Mr. Dutschke and to get rid of him, and at the same time create a martyr for the left. And so Dutschke survived the first assassination attempt, but then he died in his bathtub. Mysteriously died in his own bathtub. And then, one of these research institutes, they found an old letter of him. In the letter from 1975, he wrote to his wife of his 99.9% conviction that if I die, then at the current stage, it is more likely to be carried out, or the murder would be more likely to be carried out by the Soviet Union's secret services than by the Western secret services. So this is kind of the craziness that we have to consider when there are high-profile influencers being killed or somebody else is killed, which has a large effect on many, many, many people, and radicalizing generations. And Dutschke was not a harmless guy. I mean, he had connections to the infamous Gian Giacomo Feltrinelli. Feltrinelli was kind of managing all kinds of things back in the day. This is something that I wrote before they caught this suspect. And of course, the other types of terrorists. I mean, many Muslims didn't like Charlie Kirk. Anti-Russian people didn't like Charlie Kirk. He kind of sort of flip-flopped a little bit on Israel, which is why now the internet is claiming, of course, that the Mossad must have killed him because he was kind of, talking.
The anti-Semites are always going to blame Israel or the Jews for everything.
I mean, he was pro-Israel. I mean, Kirk was pro-Israel, but then he started saying stuff about Gaza and this, that, and the other.
Well, he was, I think Kirk was influenced by this Russian propaganda. He said terrible things about Zelensky. He said terrible things about Ukraine. This is one of the things. The thing about the really well-liked popular conservatives in the post, I guess the post William F. Buckley conservative land, is that I've been unhappy with all of them. I'm unhappy with, I'm actually unhappy with Buckley. I told him never to send me that magazine, National Review, again when Buckley attacked James Angleton and Gallitzin right when their predictions were coming true. And I know what's wrong with the conservative movement. I know that it's a movement that lies to itself. They are making the corpse of the civilization they think they're protecting, because by the way, they're conservatives without anything left to conserve. They've lost, and they're declaring victory under Reagan. It's morning in America. No, I'm sorry that it's evening and you're mistaking the dawn for the dusk. This is the problem with them, this lack of honesty about where we are in history. We are not bringing something back to life. And I looked at Turning Point USA. My father loved it. He gave money to it, and he just loved Charlie Kirk. My dad adored him, and I know why, because Charlie was, a true believing Christian conservative, and he wore it on his sleeve, and he was just a brilliant debater, such a brilliant guy, that he was, he did have some effect on the campuses. He had an effect. And now he's a martyr, by the way. And this is one of the things. Yeah, assassinations can work. I think the Kennedy assassination was a disastrous thing, and it worked for the communists Because nobody believes Lee Harvey Oswald, the communists, shot him. Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy, they all say, and the CIA did it, or the oil men, or the Texas cattlemen, or the Mossad was there. It was a firing squad with the Dealey Lama and Dealey Plaza. It was just they nobody will see it the way it is, because the communist active measures, the East Bloc active measures after the assassination worked. So the assassination worked for them, but in this case, and I'm not going to say blanket that assassinations always backfire, because they don't. But in this case, I think this assassination, unless they can cause a civil war here, it's going to backfire, because he's a martyr, and it's affected young people in a way that maybe Charlie Kirk's message to the younger generation is going to have an effect. Maybe, the jury's still out on this, and so we're going to see what's going to happen.
I mean, surely this assassination will, I think, increase dramatically, increase the cost of engaging, especially in the real world, person to person. I mean, he was traveling a lot. I mean, Kirk was traveling a lot, and traveling is a burden. I mean, you have your family. You want to spend more time with your family, and I think I heard something.
I think his family came with him on this trip. They were there.
Yeah, and that's not that's not the funnest thing in the world, to travel a lot. I mean, I just traveled to London, which is not that far away, and with my family, we spend a little over a week in London, and despite everything, the airplanes, the London Tube, the underground system, but it still takes a toll. It's still a hassle, and when an assassination like this happens, others will either have to pay a lot more for security, or they will not travel. They will just sit in a studio and just talk into a microphone.
They'll do it digitally, yes, of course.
Yeah, and of course, or they do it anonymously. They create, and I always hated that on the internet. I mean, some people they were celebrating that you could have 10 different personas, and you could write everything and write crazy stuff and hide behind the anonymity. And I was always in public. It was like, here I am. That's me. That's it, and very transparent about everything. And it's like it's a bad thing if people don't engage. If everybody's kind of. Have
you ever had death threats?
A few, not the really serious types. I mean, it was more like conspiracy guys who had a little bit too much to drink. Sometimes when you get the sense that somebody hates you and is a bit schizophrenic, that's kind of a different thing. Because
I've had that. Yeah,
because you don't know.
Threats. Yeah, I've had death threats, by the way, but I think that and I've seen other people in my position, things happen to them that you wonder what happened to them. Were they fed poison? Why did they go nuts? Why did they suddenly come down with a rare disease? You wonder because you don't know. Because a lot of journalists, look at Alexander Litvinenko. He was poisoned with polonium. Yeah. We know the Russians did it. The evidence, Scotland Yard, the British, they show it. Look at the Skripals. Look at all the people. Look at Navalny and in Russia, poisoned with
and people will inevitably get more afraid. I mean, you saw this with everybody who commented on this. I mean, if it doesn't matter if it's Bernie Sanders, doesn't matter if it's Alex Jones, doesn't matter if it's any whoever, they all get the sense of. Could this happen to me? And
this is what Governor Cox in Utah said, is that this is an attack on all of us. It's an attack on freedom of speech, because when you shoot down a brilliant speaker and debater like Charlie Kirk, you are intimidating all other speakers, especially speakers who are on the same within the same spectrum of opinion as Kirk. This is intimidation, because people then think, and I speak before a live audience, as I spoke in Toronto. Last year I spoke in Milwaukee. I spoke in Pennsylvania. So I had 3 speaking engagements before large groups of people. And you do that and you think, well, people have access to you, right? They have access to you. If some nut with a gun comes in there and really hates what you have to say, but I was not famous, so I wasn't too worried. But if you get famous, if your message is getting across, some nut job or some angry enemy is going to come up and shoot you. That suddenly you're silenced, right?
And security is expensive. I mean, Kirk was paying for security. Others are paying for security. Alex Jones
was he paying for security?
I think so. I mean, some standard bodyguards, I think, and also, I mean, Alex Jones was complaining about security necessities. I mean, when he goes out, he has bodyguards around him, and also when people figure out your home address, and then you get sent more serious death threats or threats against your children. I mean, you have to pay for security, and then you have the mental toll that it takes on you. And I also heard from somebody, I don't know if that's confirmed, somebody who really liked Kirk. He said that, Kirk had this, chronic back pain of some sort, but he still made the effort to do these appearances and honor these dates that had been set up. So it takes a toll, right?
So look at especially, I should give special mention to the defectors that I've known both from China and from Russia. People like Colonel Stanislav Lunev, Li Mengyan from Russia, Mr. Wang of Luda Media. These people live under very real death threats. Having these Central American Communist terrorist group, what is it, MS-13? No, it's am I remembering it right? Showing up at their house, taking pictures of their house. Lunev had to be very careful. Other Russian KGB people that I've known that have broken with the KGB actually have gone silent, some of them.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, right? Even at some point, it's not going to be enough to just be holed up in your studio, because you're still a target, and it's not, even if you don't travel. And eventually, doing media, being an influencer or whatever, it becomes a luxury that only few can afford. I mean, it's going to be these government
There's an advantage to being unsuccessful, Alex. It's not making very much money and not reaching very many people. There's a real benefit to that.
And the cost will increase, and in the future, maybe when this becomes a bigger problem, only very, very few people will be able to be influencers because everybody else cannot pay for security. I mean, if you're government, you get more security, obviously. And it's interesting to see that Kirk was shot, who wasn't government, but he was associated with government. So you get the full terrorist effect from that murder, but it's a softer target. It's not a government target. It's well protected. And also, from a law enforcement standpoint, the government makes more of an effort, or there's more freedom for government when a government person gets killed, because Kirk was a private citizen. I mean, there's terrorism.
That's why I'm glad about the governor of Utah saying that they were treating this. He said, well, why there's murders happening all over the place. Why have we focused on this one? That's unfair. Because I assume he received a lot of criticism. I'm sure the governor's office. Why are you treating Charlie Kirk so special? There's all these other murders and you're not focusing the same level. And that's why he made the explanation at the press conference yesterday. He said, look, this is an attack on all of us. This is a political assassination. This is different. And I think he's exactly right. He was exactly right.
And it touches. I mean, people they focused, of course, on the gun rights debate because Kirk was talking about gun rights when he was shot. But I think the more because we know about that debate. We know how things are with that. But I think the other debate that's overlooked is how much security we need, and this is something that. A lot on the right wing, or specific types of right wingers today, they almost sound like left wingers when they complain about all the security measures and what the intelligence community can do. And security cameras and spying on, radicals and crazies. I mean, it's always kind of those types of guys that, I mean, people that liked Kirk, but at the same time they were just enemies of the intelligence community and enemies of security measures. And when I was in London, when I was in London with my family, I mean, we had to go through all these checks. You check in advance. They scan your digital record. If they let you into the country, you're being searched. Everything's scanned. They have these fancy full body scanners at the airport. And they can, I mean, when you land in Heathrow, they can look into your digital devices. And I think they have the right to check your phones, check your laptops, and they tell you, if I remember correctly, to keep all your devices charged. You cannot pass through if they want to see all your devices and one isn't charged. You have to charge it first so they can have a look at it. And in London, of course, there's many cameras in London. Bag searches everywhere. You can't get into anything of any significance other than, some restaurants. You can't get into anything of significance without a pat down, a metal detector, a bag check, right? And then we went to this what do you call it, a Ferris wheel? The big, they call it the London Eye. This is like this huge, I think they call it a Ferris wheel in the US.
Yeah, we call it a Ferris wheel. Yeah.
And so it's so large.
You get in a seat and you go around and around, and you get to go up really high.
It's so large. When you're at the top, you are pretty much as high as the tallest buildings, or some of the tallest buildings in the city. And before we got on,
it's a very old-fashioned thrill. Those kind of things were invented, 150 years ago. It's kind of an old-fashioned thrill that you get from that.
And I think, and so we went into, before we went into this cabin, because they're enclosed in special glass. Before we went in, these people, the staff people, they went in and they had these little mirrors on telescope sticks, and they were checking below the seats if somebody left a bomb. I mean, every single cabin,
that's really terrible. That's
was
terrible.
Searched. And it's not like they do this for show. I mean, this is like a very baseline accusation that all threats are exaggerated, and it's just the intelligence community. They want to read everybody's browser
you have one
history.
terrorist act on a thing like that kills 50 people. Because there could be 50 people in
and
there.
then when you go through part of Buckingham Palace, the parts they let you go through, of course, bag search, metal detectors, everything. And so you go through this thing, and what you immediately realize is how difficult it must be to have a major event, at Buckingham Palace or St. Paul's or Westminster Abbey. Because if you have all these high-powered guests, the high nobility and other important people that they associate with, and some pop stars, all these important people, everyone is a target, a major target for many groups out there, many enemies, and it's there's so many spectators as well. I mean, probably people have seen the footage, more recent footage or historical footage of these large events. Crowds and crowds and crowds of people. It's a security nightmare. And this is why the royals and, they're quite large families, they have these royals, they don't like to be in London that much because of the security concerns, because it's a hassle. Armored cars sneaking in unmarked vans, threats everywhere, people hate your guts. And so it's a big security event when there's a coronation in London, or when there's a wedding, a royal wedding. It's a security nightmare. And these royals, they like to live in their other palaces outside of London or in Scotland or wherever. But even that's not enough. I mean, we saw what happened to Lord Louis Mountbatten. He got blown up in a boat
Yeah, he
by a
got
bomb.
blown up. Yeah.
Yeah, and we saw it. We went into
What was that? 1970, 71 when he got blown up?
something
Right there.
like that.
I remember seeing the newspaper. I saw it in the newspaper at the time.
Yeah.
It was all over the news. Yeah.
So it's a security. Everything is a security nightmare in London, and people are working hard every day to protect the population at large and to prevent these terrorist acts, which then can cause bigger problems. And just like when we looked at these wax figures, the Madame Tussauds wax figures. I mean, my daughter wanted to see it, my wife wanted to see it. I wasn't really interested in seeing these wax figures. And of course, they have the royal family.
Were they lifelike?
Oh, they're pretty good. They're much better than I thought they would be. And they have the right size. They have the right size, and it's uncanny. It's like you're standing in front of them. It's really uncanny. But they had the royal.
What kind of people? What people? Just out of curiosity, what people are in the wax thing? Historical figures?
Oh, they have everything. They I sent you a photo of me and wax Winston Churchill.
Wow, he was a short guy, wasn't he?
Yeah,
he was pretty small.
Well, I'm pretty short, so if he's not looking tall, then he must have been kind of short. And so I mean,
you were taller than him, right?
I don't know, but it's like they had the royal family there. They had the older Queen Elizabeth II, and they had Prince Philip there, very lifelike, and then far removed from them, kind of outside of the circle, they had Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, which of course alludes to the those two breaking away from the family. And fairly recently, it was in the news media that the family, they cut off Harry and Meghan from the payments for security. So Harry is still a target because he's associated
where does he live now? Where did
the US,
they live?
Canada, or the US, I think.
Yeah.
And
I thought they had moved to North America.
Yeah, and so they are still a target for many groups around the world, and so it's expensive. Security is expensive. You can't just go anywhere, just like that. And so if the family cuts you off from these payments for security personnel, eventually he may have to come home. So it's a security nightmare, and everywhere we visited, we were bag searched and wanded down, and even these historical sites, the London Tower, that's actually a fortress. That's a whole fortress, and they have great exhibits. But what I noticed on one of the walls where you're supposed to walk on from one place to the other, they had these little exhibits. Those were metal replicas of old documents, court documents. And they related to security threats, terrorist threats, and others. And so they had like these recreated documents where they caught a guy with incriminating evidence, documents detailing the British security measures. And he had a lemon for invisible ink to write in this with the lemon juice. And so they had this bureaucratic system, and they said, yeah, we've proven conclusively that he's spying against the crown, many hundreds of years ago. And so there was a German guy. And so this German guy was sentenced to death and shot in the courtyard or the central area of that fortress. And so everything is, you see the history of the British Empire, and it's always about security. It's always about threats. And even when we went to this, what was it called? It's this thing where underground where I think it's called the London Dungeon. It's like an interactive theatrical performance. You get to see some darker aspects of history, and they have all these actors playing these roles, and of course they had the gunpowder plot. When these Catholic Jesuit networks tried to blow up the government. And so they told the story with Guy Fawkes and how he was almost caught early, but the guards kind of was told some BS story and he believed it, and they only caught the guy later and foiled the plot and then tortured the guy, and it's just constant throughout history, always about security. These empires were fragile, and today's societies are also kind of fragile, and the Russians know this, the Chinese know this. And I posted this bit on candorintel.com about the Kirk shooting, and this piece is called "The Urgency of Violence: Why Radicals Turn to Terrorism." The draft of this was actually created with my own GPT. So you can create your own specialized version of ChatGPT, and you can feed it your own material. So I was feeding it more than 1 million words in English, like 13, 14 books or whatever. So north of 1 million words. And I told the system to create drafts for me based on all kinds of sources, but also using my material as a guide. And so you can let the system create a draft, and you can add things to it because you don't want to spend hours reprompting and telling your own GPT to work over that section, and that section. I mean, it's like what are you supposed to use these chatbots for? To just do a little bit of legwork for you. And so this thing is called "The Urgency of Violence: Why Radicals Turn to Terrorism." Terrorism emerges where individuals and groups feel trapped between the urgency of their cause and the futility of peaceful paths. Across centuries and continents, radicals of different ideological backgrounds, Islamist militants, right-wing extremists, leftist revolutionaries, and fanatical climate activists, have all been driven by a belief that time is running out. This urgency transforms grievances into existential crises, and the conviction that peaceful means will never work transforms frustration into violence. And so it goes through historical roots of Islamist urgency, because the big Islamic empire is gone. For over 100 years, they didn't have their own real unified empire any longer, and they're losing ground. Muslims are losing ground every day to the US and the European Union, and so at some point it's too late. The West is too advanced, too technological, you can never catch up, and that's that. There goes your chance. Game's over. And this is what drives many Islamist terrorists. And of course, this is what the Russians can use, the Chinese intelligence can use. They will go to these groups and tell them that it's urgent. You need direct action. If you talk and talk, it's not going to get you anywhere, and then times run out and you're all screwed. And many Islamist radicals, they have a cosmic layer to this urgency or sense of urgency. Groups like ISIS speak in apocalyptic terms, imagining that their battles are the opening stages of a final war between Islam and the West. The town of Dabiq in Syria was mythologized as the site of Armageddon, and blah, blah, blah. Then futility of peaceful means. The Islamists, they tried, especially with Europe, it's not as bad or pronounced yet in the US. Radical Muslims, they tried to get into Europe through as refugees or as migrants, and then have their radical they do the radical program. They try to gain new members. They carve out their own special zones, try to change
proselytizing and building their networks.
And if we look back, at some point the Islamic Empire went into Spain. right? They
Well,
North
they
Africa.
invaded. That was an outright
Yeah.
invasion. Yeah.
Yeah,
And they
North
even
Africa
invaded
was
France.
Spain.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
What
think
is now France
the
anyway.
Austrians had to fight them off, and so they wanted to get
That
into
was
Europe.
much later. Yeah. Well, Charles Martel stopped them in
Yeah,
what is now France, and of course at the gates of Vienna in the early 1600s. The Turks conquered Hungary, what is now Hungary, carried a million people off into the slave markets of Baghdad and Cairo and
yeah,
Istanbul, and because they have slavery. And then they marched on Vienna, and it was just the rallying of Europe at the gates of Vienna that they stopped the Turks. This was a very powerful Turkish empire with an incredible army and a really great leader
yeah.
at the time, a great military leader.
At some point, they
But
were
of course,
they
yeah.
were in even in the Muslim Empire was even in what's now I think the south of Ukraine at some point.
Well, yeah, they were in Crimea, and of course the Crimean War. Britain and France came in on the side of the Turks to prevent the Russians from conquering Crimea, and that was in the late 1850s or mid 1850s, the Crimean War. You had, the Turks, of course, had mixed it up with the horsemen of the steppe, and they had what is the Ukrainian word for it? Baba Yar and all these horsemen that sort of defended the marchlands would be I think a term. I think that you get the word marquis, wasn't the King of Prussia, wasn't Prussia it was a marchland, and the King of Prussia made himself, declared himself a king. He was just the noble that defended that eastern part of Germany from the incursions from the east. You had this evolved. Warlordism after the fall of the Roman Empire was the name of the game. You had to have strong men to protect yourself from the barbarians, from the Viking raiders, from other people who were after your property.
You needed an empire for the longest time. You really needed.
Well, it was feudal. It was feudalism, and the empires were sort of overlaid over it, and it was a system that developed in the Middle Ages. But it wasn't. It was when you had modernity, you had rationalization, and the Swedes really were the first. Charles XII. Or before Charles XII, it was during the 30 Years' War, the Swedish army, the smaller country, had this most effective army that smashed the Catholic armies of the emperor, the Holy Roman Emperor, and rolled back the Catholic tide. Because the Catholics came in, the emperor came in and rolled back Protestantism. They took all of Germany up to the Baltic, and the Swedes came in to rescue the Protestants. And they thought, well, how does the Swedish army do this? And it was the first army that was operating on these modern principles of organization that then spread to Holland and spread to England. And the British fleet, of course, was organized this way, British finance, and it was a revolution in banking, a revolution, administrative revolution. People often don't realize that. And it was the Swedes who first pioneered that. And it was why Sweden became this great empire that almost took the north. If Peter the Great had been defeated by the Swedes, Charles XII, what we'd have now at St. Petersburg would be a Swedish city, not a Russian city, right? But the Peter the Great won the Great Northern War. Charles XII died before he could re-engage it in a tragic incident. And so history is changed by the death of leaders, but that's what happened back then, and the transition from feudalism to modern rationalized form of organization went in hand with the Newtonian revolution, with the revolution of Sir Isaac Newton, who really didn't believe in it. And
I think I walked on his grave. I think I walked on Newton's grave in St. Paul's or the other palace.
Newton was into esotericism. He was into astrology. He was into
ghosts.
Yes, he was into the supernatural. People don't realize, and yet he invented. It was Newtonian physics and this idea of the universe as a giant mechanism, right? the mechanistic view of, and which goes along with the materialist view, that so reigned supreme and came in the time of the Enlightenment, where people were starting, and this is when people were starting to lose religion and losing the mystical view of the world. Now, quantum mechanics and chaos theory have shown that, wait a minute, Newtonian mechanics don't work. Quantum mechanics is not mechanical, right? It's the mind is influencing it. It's like with chaos theory. It's like, why do all of these pendulums find synchronicity? You put a bunch of pendulums on a wall and they'll all synchronize. Women in the same room, working in the same office, are going to, their periods are going to move closer to each other. They're going to synchronize. Why does this happen? And of course, this is where Newton and people who believed in parallelism and esotericism, these are principles out of esotericism, not out of mechanical view of things, because it's spiritual forces. It's the mind. It's Hermeticism. This is where you suddenly get, Hegel is already emerging as a. I think Voegelin was right. He was a magician. He was an occultist. He was an esotericist. He was a Hermeticist. And McGee has written a book on Hermeticism and Hegel, and it's quite verified. And this is where you get out of Germany. I mean, Hegel was born in the most mystical center in Germany, grew up there, was influenced by it. And of course, this influenced Marx, who suddenly moves away. I mean, dialectics is not exactly a mechanistic form of materialism, right? So thus you develop these new political religions out of the descendant thought of Hegel, out of Marx, out of the Nazis. And people say, well, why is Hegel so attacked for this? Because they could see, and I think Voegelin had it right. I mean, whether or not Gnosticism is the right metaphor he used, he later said, oh, okay, I could have used something different. When people pointed out Gnosticism was a lot more complicated, and there have been more recent scholarship on it. But still, there is a deeper sense in which the understanding of Voegelin, the understanding of McGee, the understanding of some of the conservative philosophers. I mean, Voegelin wasn't a conservative, right? But out of these conservatives grabbed hold of it and used it, and they said, look, there's this turn of our philosophy, which explains the turn to violence, which explains the French Revolution, which explains the Soviet, the Bolshevik Revolution and the Soviet tyranny, and we're still in it. We haven't escaped from it yet. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, you saw
this
that.
Kid is an example that shot Charlie Kirk.
Yeah. In London, everywhere you saw the idolization of, the heroes of the past. It wasn't, you had in this cathedral, you had the kings and the most, the most precious kind of burial sites and statues, but then pretty close to them you have Horatio Nelson, the Navy, the famous Navy commander. Then you have like these stone, these little slabs of marble or whatever, dark marble. And you're supposed to walk on it, and below them are the remains of Sir Isaac Newton and the scientists and even some artists. Did you
feel a chill when you walked over their grave?
It was something that I've never done before. I mean, I've never walked on the grave of somebody, but here they want you to do it, and they want you because it feels more personal. What is
the reasoning? It feels more
personal. It's just different. You're not standing to the side. You're actually on
it's
on
a
top
special
of it.
Consecrated place, which is a very old-fashioned mystical idea.
Nobody should ever have a simplistic understanding of empires, and it goes both ways.
Or of anything. We shouldn't have a simplistic understanding of anything.
And there's different types of simplistic views on empires, especially about the British Empire. I mean, the one interpretation is, as long as it's, imperialism, as long as it's powerful, it must be good. It's not as simple. And we saw that, the American Revolution, Americans wanted to be Americans.
It wasn't good for the Irish, was it?
They didn't. People didn't want to be British colonialists anymore. and they didn't want to be governed by King George III anymore. So that's a distinction, and we saw the British system starting to fail in certain ways over the next generations, and so it would have been. It wasn't as easy as just sticking with what sticking with what worked in the past and never change anything. And even today,
the American founding fathers, I should just interject with Lord North and King George. America was suffering abuses, and I should just note Edmund Burke
Britain was running out of money. They squeezed the colonies because they needed them. They desperately wanted the money.
They fought the real first true World War was the 7 Years' War, where Prussia and Great Britain were fighting everybody else. France and Spain and Russia and Austria were all fighting against Britain and Prussia. And Prussia was the one caught on land, holding the line. Frederick the Great did this. But the British Navy at that time defeated the French Navy, the Spanish Navy. The people don't realize the British conquered the Philippines. They conquered Canada. They conquered India. They conquered Cuba. Now, the English, they really hated the French. So they kept Canada and India because they took Canada and India from the French. But they even though they conquered Cuba and Philippines, they gave them back to Spain because they wanted to have better relations with Spain in the future. They didn't give back Gibraltar, of course. But but this was the war that made England the ultimate empire. People don't realize how much it did. But again, yes, money was a problem, and the English had not perfected their system of living on credit with their banking system where they were always indebted. And they made it work for more than 100 years, but they weren't so sure of it. But they had a brilliant leader, William Pitt the Elder, who was the one that basically brought all that about. He was able to come up with the money. He was able to create the fleets and the armies necessary, for example, to conquer Canada and to do all these things. Clive in India and so on. And of course, as long as Frederick the Great could survive somehow on land against all the land armies, he joked that he was caught between three women. What was it? Elizabeth, the Empress of Russia, Maria Theresa of Austria, and Madame de Pompadour, the mistress of King Louis XV. So he said he was caught between these three women. He was a bit of a wit, but that war ended successfully, and England was the great winner of that war, and the British Navy reigned supreme from thenceforth afterwards, except when the French Navy briefly defeated the British Navy at the end of the American Revolution, which is what caused the surrender at Yorktown. The British could not supply Cornwallis's army that was trapped, and the French fleet was out there, and they had to surrender. The one time the French Navy came through, allowed America to come into existence, really, because the British ruling the sea permanently, you're just strangled, right? Yeah. You're just strangled. Yeah. And so to understand the British Empire, America got free, and Edmund Burke said, America is the most valuable part of the British Empire. You must not provoke them, he said, because they controlled our trade. They controlled America's trade, and then they began taxing us. And if you control someone's trade, it's already a kind of tax.
Yeah.
So you're taxing and controlling the trade, which was absolutely intolerable in principle to the Americans. They all felt it. They all felt it as an oppression. You had the Boston Tea Party and so on. Well, what is it? Only a 3% tax? Big deal? No, you have to understand. They understood the British were squeezing them. And then they were quartering soldiers in their houses, and they were taking the side of the Indians, which was very strange.
And the British, they were just... the British were going bigger and bigger and bigger, and they wanted to control, too many parts of the world.
And King George, and at that moment, remember, King George was a third in the line of the German Georges. He was the first truly English King George, because the previous two were really still German, spoke German in their household, and spoke English with an accent, or I think King George I.
And so why would you pay?
English, it was very broken.
So why would you pay for the king's plans that are too big, that are just too vast and wouldn't work out in the long run.
Well,
So
the victory went to their heads in the 7 Years' War. They really had something else.
yeah. So you can't. So and eventually, you know, America or the new United States and Britain learned to become trading partners and collaborate in security matters. So
well, not at first. It took more than 100 years. It took a while because you got to remember the War of 1812 happened. We ended up fighting Britain when Napoleon was fighting Britain. We have to remember that the British were boarding American ships, impressing American sailors into service in the British Navy, and the French did some of the same. America was in a terrible position, and didn't want to become involved in the war, and did. And the British would have intervened in the American Civil War if Lincoln hadn't made the Emancipation Proclamation. I think that's pretty clear.
And in hindsight, I mean, we saw the you know, I could almost touch the last uniform of Horatio Nelson, you know, from the
greatest Battle of Trafalgar. The greatest admiral.
Yeah.
By the way, Nelson was the greatest naval warrior, the greatest admiral, the greatest seaman in all history.
Yeah, and he split his forces into two groups, and then the northern group, they did this bait and switch maneuver. Then they cut the enemy's forces into three parts, and they captured
the Spanish
ships
and the French fleet steaming north to the Channel to meet up with Napoleon's army.
So I could almost touch his last uniform that still had the bullet hole. And
was there blood? Was there blood on the uniform from the bullet hole?
No, but they had some of the interior clothing and some of the stuff you couldn't see. I mean, internally you couldn't see inside the uniform. Yeah. But it's like you could. It's
killed by a sniper, by a French sniper. The French would put snipers in the masts of their ships to shoot the British officers down.
And so if you see these physical objects from these huge battles, I mean, obviously the thought comes to your mind that if some of these, or if the relevant if these relevant European empires, if they had sort of worked together, that would have been fantastic, right? I mean, in some ways, they could have avoided so many battles and problems, and they could have created something much, much greater. So just blanket traditional imperialism is not always the right choice. It's not always the obvious choice. It's not always leading towards
imperialism. You know, there was Joseph Schumpeter wrote early on in his academic career a book on imperialism and social classes, and people get this wrong all the time. And Schumpeter was one who got it right, who really understood this the nobility of Europe coming out of the warrior aristocracy and that ethic and chivalry and all the rest. And what he said is, he said, look, why were there empires? Everybody, you know, Lenin is wrong, basically, in his theory of imperialism. And the idea that these empires are all about making money, no. The empires are more expensive than they're worth. This is the actual truth of the matter. And this is what people discovered, you know, as time went on. Empires are more expensive than they're worth. Look at America in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, America's not an empire, but it was trying to sort of perform that role that the British would perform, nailing these areas down. This is too expensive. It's not worth it by any means. What did we get out of it? People said, oh, we were stealing Iraqi oil. No, we weren't. So the thing is what he said is why the empires, the reason why is the aristocracy. These European countries still had aristocratic families. The aristocratic families still had their social role, and the aristocrats are raised to be a leadership class. They're raised to be warriors, right? Send one son to the church and one to the army or navy, whatever. And where would they go? If you didn't have an empire, these younger sons of aristocrats couldn't really, there's no career to perform your aristocratic function anymore. You had to be governing India. You had to be getting colonies in Africa, right? You had to be doing things in China and the Far East. You had to have an empire. for them to have a role. And it was so the empire performed an outlet for the aristocratic class. This is what Schumpeter concluded. And he was right. And it was an outlet that wasn't the negative outlet of the aristocrats fighting World War I, for example, because World War I, when these empires fought each other, destroyed aristocracy once and for all in Europe because their boys were slaughtered as leaders. You know, you had people like Churchill who came through it. He was a colonel at the front lines in the trenches, as well as, you know, after he got kicked out as First Lord of the Admiralty for the disaster at in Turkey. He tried to invade the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus, and Gallipoli. Right, that was a disaster that Churchill. So the aristocratic mindset was dying, and liberalism was taking its place. The commercial bosses, the barons of industry were taking over, and that transition, World War II, hurried that on, and the curtain came down on that aristocracy, and then holding on to the empires, both for the French and the British, became impossible because there wasn't the aristocratic impetus. I mean, just think how the French aristocracy, if it had really been vibrant, would have just gloried in the Algerian War and in fighting in Southeast Asia. They would have never given it up. They would have loved it, right?
Sure.
But the commercial interests, the democratic interest was, we're tired of this. This is horrible. Our sons are dying. We don't want it. And America, of course, never had. It was not aristocratic and couldn't hold, you know, it was amazing. We held up on Vietnam and then just turned around and handed it over to the communists in the end because we elected a liberal Congress in 1974 in the middle of Watergate. America tried to adopt this British mindset of we're holding the world together. We're freedom of the seas. Yeah. We're performing the role the British Navy did. We really look at this. We've slowly lost even the will to do it. Look at Trump. Look at America first.
I mean, to me, I think for the most part, empires existed because other empires existed, and at some point, somebody made the first or decided to have the first mini empire, and others had to compete. It goes back to Babylon.
It goes back to Babylon and the Assyrians and the Egyptians.
Somehow you had to compete, and people tried out a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but you know, you had to compete, and it is as much as much as I hate all the slavery and the sugar plantations and all that, we have to remember at the time these empires were fragile, and if you took risks with making moral choices, it increased the danger of losing against an opponent, and the opponent would be a traditional empire with no qualms. I mean, even Napoleon reinstated slavery. And so if you lost money, if you lost control, you would be taken over by an enemy, and the result would be traditional empire, slavery, and you wouldn't have a moral outcome necessarily. And that's why we have to be very careful in judging these old empires.
Well, that's why aristocratic Europe was against Napoleon, why they united against him, because he was determined on carving out something new.
And even
disrupting the order of Europe, and
even of course the Portuguese made it big with their African slaves, and they got the ball rolling. The Spanish then did it. The French
protected
did it.
by the British Navy, by the way.
And you mentioned the Turks
grew up under the shadow of the British Empire.
And you mentioned the Turks. The Turks did it. So it was a brutal world, and somehow you had to compete. And this is why we cannot have simplistic interpretations of these past empires. And I think the Russians, today as a KGB regime, and we talked about all the important Russians and how they're all KGB basically. The Russians will use, for the most part, two different types of false interpretations of the past, especially the British Empire first and foremost. And one false interpretation is to say well, imperialism is always good. Just do it the traditional way. This is what they sell to the right-wingers now. They're saying Russia is now conservative and Christian, and Putin talked at length about this to Tucker Carlson and at other points in time, saying it's a thousand years of Russian imperialism. We're just continuing the old thing, and everybody else did it, so it's the right way to do it. But it's run by the KGB, and you cannot have this murder and plunder and enslavement that the Russians want to impose on others. And it's so stupid when I see people justifying what the Russians are doing in Ukraine and what they wanted to do with Ukraine in a blitzkrieg operation, taking over most of Ukraine or all of Ukraine, enslaving the people, brainwashing them, re-educating them, and using these people as cheap labor and new soldiers for the next wars. I mean, you cannot. That's why they're selling this primitive idea of imperialism to one target group, and then of course they have another false interpretation of history for another target group, the left. This is classic Marxism or Marxism-Leninism. This is when they completely garble cause and effect, and they say, well, because of private property, because of individual property and accumulation, this inevitably leads to murder and slaughter and wars and annihilation. And they view imperial history as evidence for that Marxist doctrine.
Yeah, sure. Private property is the root of all these evils.
Yeah, and so this is kind of the other primitive view of these past empires, especially the British one, including the slave labor on sugar plantations and all that.
But you have to remember the Marxist view in the case of Putin, and I believe he is still a Marxist-Leninist, just as the Chinese leaders are. The Marxist view is that they're an empire against empires because they're going to bring about advanced communism, whereas we've evolved from primitive communism through slavery, through feudalism, through capitalism, and now with the communist revolution, we reach advanced communism where people can be communist with advanced tools, which of course, with the system of accumulation of private property, is how you create advanced tools. Without a market, right? Without a division of labor, you can get no social advancement. You can get no rise in the social state or the standard of living or no increase in technology, because it's only through an increase in the division of labor that you can have people develop science and industry and things and raise us up. Otherwise, we're just scratching the soil for a living, barely eating in a subsistence agriculture economy. And so the Marxists, this was their theory. Of course, the theory is it sounds good, to someone who doesn't know history, but it's completely wrong. But it justifies them using violence to create their revolution and saying, well, we're not really an empire. We're the revolution, and we're destroying the real empires, and we're bringing about the emancipation of man. This is what they really think.
And it's a silly notion of Marxism, and that may have been an influence on this suspect who's now in custody with the Kirk shooting. Maybe he was influenced by the silly idea.
Well, I wonder about his. There are apprentice programs of unions, right? And so maybe he was converted to leftism his first year in college and say, "Why don't you join here? You're a good socialist. You're a white boy. Why don't you join get into an electrician's apprentice program through this union?" Maybe it was someone on the left who mentored him and took him in and offered him this. I don't know. I'm speculating. But when I see that he's going into a working class, apprentice program, and he comes out and his views have changed, I'm thinking.
And he killed a rich man.
Was he mentored?
He killed a wealthy man with powerful connections who had all the things that he did not have. And it's like, it's a silly notion of this the silly Marxist notion that the empires of the past were all evil and the leadership. It was just
It
about
was all
greed and evil.
robbery, right? Imperialism is robbery.
It was just all about greed and evil, when in reality it was to a large degree about survival. It was about persisting and not be taken over by the competition. And you had to be rough. You had to be incredibly tough. And the norm was, for the longest time, when we see how many empires came and went and smaller empires came and went, the norm was failure. This is something that people don't understand, how easy it is to fail and how rare it is, for better or worse, how rare it is to have a structure that is sustainable, that lasts a long time, and that is not taken over. Because I picked up this book. This was in it was either in the Imperial War Museum in London or one of the other places. This was in the Natural History Museum, actually. I think it was. So I picked up this book, and because they sold a bunch of books, and one just caught my eye. It was called Slave Empire. It had like this fancy cover and praised by the media and blah blah blah. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna pick this up. Written by an academic who went to Princeton, I believe, and Harvard, and blah blah blah. So I wondered, okay, what book is this going to be? And you can see the Marxism on almost every page. He's almost like gleefully telling the audience that all of this history is supposedly evidence for the Marxist gimmick. You know, that property means greed and exploitation and wars for more property and blah blah blah. But he never touches upon the survival aspect of empires. He never considers that. I mean, he's not trained in that either, but he could have asked, he could have looked into this to get a real perspective. But he was content with his Marxism, and he pretends to be, I think, much smarter than he really is, because real intelligence means you get into the complexity and you just try to place yourself into this position of people back then who were fighting it out battle by battle, strategy by strategy, intelligence op by intelligence op, just to stay afloat, just to have a future and not be taken over by a competitor. And so it's unfortunate that all these gruesome things happened, the exploitation happened, but it was, there were so many different empires at the time. At times you had a Mongol empire, at times you had other people, at times you had a big Muslim empire. You were under constant threat. I mean, England was always just one invasion away from massive problems and just derailment. And when I was reading this book, the author of Slave Empire, he gave a few examples that I think he didn't understand the meaning of, because he was just so enamored by his Marxism. He was talking about these wild days when, the British and the French and the Spanish, they were fighting for these sugar colonies, because for some reason people back home started to eat sugar like crazy, so they bought it. So that's what brought in money.
They needed the sugar for their tea and their coffee.
Yeah, it was a luxury item at first, but then everybody wanted to eat sugar, so this became the money making.
Let them eat cake.
Yeah, this became like the thing that made money for the empire, so they went with that. And so it was a wild time. Sometimes these big powers, they had, full control over certain areas, but not full control over some other areas. And there was this one area where a general and his colleagues, they had control over that smaller area. And they thought, why don't we make up our own empire here? And so they did. And the leader, the leading general, he crowned himself king of his own little country then. Okay. But then two of his colleagues or subordinates, they conspired against him and they murdered him. So now you had two leaders, and guess what happened? These two leaders started to fight each other. And so they split their little country into two. The northern part, I think, was still a kingdom. The southern part was labeled a republic. And they went to war with each other. And so the author of this slave empire book then says, oh, look, this is what Marx has been saying all along. This is just what property does. And, individual, control. This is what it does.
As if human beings could really live without property and be human.
Sure.
This is really crazy.
It's like if we talked about a different area, then you would have had no chance whatsoever of making your mini empire because you're competing with the big empire. So no chance. And even if you said, oh, let's use this one little area here and try Marxism or try communism there. First of all, you're competing with the other empires. Then you're competing with anybody else. And then your system would break down fairly quickly and wouldn't make any money. So you can't pay for your own security. And it was the norm to fail. Eventually, it was the normal thing to break apart and have chaos reign, and so this is why it was such a rare thing to have like large empires form, and they were fighting tooth and nail to not fall apart and to not lose. And this is what the author doesn't understand, because he's never been in a position to provide for security, to keep things together. Okay, so we cannot blatantly say all imperialism is good. Let's go with the Russians, or let's go with the Chinese. All imperialism is good. It's not as simple, but you also cannot just say all these empires of the past, it was just all about evil, and being evil was just the reason to exist for them. It was about survival. Okay, so I talk about the Muslim terrorism, then of course the right wing radicals, and of course right wing ethnic radicalism. I mean, they do sort of have an argument when it comes to demographics, because you can't just make new people in a factory like that, like you make nails or canned food. It takes time, it takes humans, and it takes a lot of effort, and the conditions need to be there. So this is something that of course helped the radicals, the crazies, when they point towards the demographics of the West, especially Europe, when the traditional population, they have fewer and fewer children. As more migrants coming in, refugees coming in, and so this becomes a problem eventually when you have a population implosion. So you don't have enough kids in this generation, and then of course you don't even have enough potential parents in the next generation. And some people will, I think, some countries, I think, will halve in size, or population size. I think Poland may be half the population in the future, even though they're conservative, because they don't have enough children. And Italy, very very few children of the traditional population. Germany, complete utter disaster. I mean, many just left. Many just left for the United States, even in the last 20 years. They just go. And so this, of course, fuels right-wing radicals. This is also what the Russians will try to push with their propaganda, and what the Russians will also push with other means. The sense of urgency. We need to do something now, or our population will decline too much, and we can never get back to previous levels, and then we're a minority, and we know what happens to minorities usually in history. And also there's two case studies. Obviously, the Oklahoma City bombing. I think we've talked about this on one of the previous episodes quite a while ago. Timothy McVeigh acted out of belief that the U.S. government was that there was a soon there would be a takeover United Nation would come in with tanks and disarm the American patriots and put them in internment camps. And this would happen very soon, he believed. And this then would be called the New World Order. Now, this was what he believed even in the early 90s. It's now 2025. This thing hasn't happened yet, how he imagined it would happen, but he felt that sense of urgency. And even today, right-wingers will still feel that sense of urgency, and they become terrorists. The relative strength of the left movement in the U.S., the relative strength of the Democratic Party, this all makes people very agitated, and they think the time is running out. With the left-wing radicals, which we might have a left-wing radical with this Kirk Shooter suspect now. The left-wingers, they always battled with this idea of, should we have a gradual march towards revolution, or should we have a revolution now? Even Marx himself was accused of both ideas. I mean, some people accused him of, he would preach to people to wait forever for the revolution. Others accused him of being too rash and encouraging people especially in Germany, with these mini revolution attempts, encouraging people of doing something violent and radical, even though it's not well planned and not well funded. And they always had this debate internally. Should we do it quickly? Should we do it slowly? And they also feel that time is running out, because they think that the West is becoming way too powerful. The mega corporations, the hedge funds, what they call the military industrial complex and whatnot, they feel like they cannot beat this through talking. And we saw this, I think, in recent years, when this talking strategy of the left started to fail, because during the Bush years, they had the funny influencers, they had the Jon Stewart Daily Show, and they were really popular, especially with the young people, and they were making these jokes about political jokes, really, about the Bush administration, using humor as a weapon. And obviously the talking would one day in their minds be replaced with action and new laws, and just laws that would be enforced through some sort of police eventually. So it's not all about talking forever. But in the last years, with influencers like Kirk and left right-wing influencers, more and more of them, and even comedians, right-wing or conservative-leaning comedians, that became really good at their job. So then the left was seeing this and saying, we're losing young people now. It's not like in the Bush era. I mean, in the Bush era, I still remember that the average Fox News viewer was like 60 years old, something around that. So they were almost retirement age people who watched Fox News, and there wasn't anything for the younger crowd. Eventually, some people started to call Alex Jones in his InfoWars outlet Fox News for for people below 50. Because it became more and more pro-Republican Party, even though he hated the Republicans in the Bush era. So yeah, it's like the left was really, really frustrated. And there's also a case study. This was called The Shining Path in Peru, led by Abimael Guzman. This Maoist movement believed revolution was imminent, massacred peasants who resisted. They said time was short, violence was destiny. And obviously, eco-extremists, climate fanatics, they think they are racing against extinction. I mean, there's no greater sense of urgency for them because some supercomputer simulation said we're all gonna burn to a crisp, and so they become more and more agitated, and they feel like they cannot do this through talking. And I mean, they already moved over to gluing themselves to public roads and sabotaging things, and eventually we may see some larger eco-terrorism in order to because they believe that's the only way they can save the world. And it's scientists, they call it the last generation syndrome, when activists are told you're the last generation that can save this planet, and so they feel like they're more important than they really are. There's even a climate group that's called, the last generation, and so yeah, it's very apocalyptic to them, and it's these common patterns, urgency, or a sense of urgency breeds terrorism, and we don't know yet if the killer of Charlie Kirk was motivated by a sense of urgency. I mean, some terrorists are, some terrorists are not. I mean, we saw this Breivik guy in Norway who killed a bunch of kids on an island and then blew up a bomb in the government district. And this Norwegian guy, he had this calculation laid out in his manifesto. He said that the slow way is the losing way. We're not gaining ground. Over time, we will lose and never gain the advantage back. So he thought they needed direct action now. And he was also pro-Russia, by the way. He was saying that Europeans would need Russia to win.
This is what you find creeping in on the right everywhere. This looking to Russia for the solution, and it's
with a sense of urgency. Only Russia can save us because Trump is not saving them, and Kirk was not saving them.
Charlie Kirk was that part of MAGA that believed that Vladimir Putin was okay, that the problem was NATO. And the problem was American foreign policy. So, which is, I would have loved to have that debate with him. It's no longer possible. But it's sort of in the destiny of things. I think that part of MAGA is doomed. And the very fact that Charlie Kirk went that way meant that ultimately his political position, unless he changed it, was going to run aground. And it's very ironic that someone from the left, who is from this woke left apparently, would gun him down, not realizing, and the Russians are trying to exploit it, but not realizing in a sense that both the shooter and Mr. Kirk were being manipulated by what was the communist movement, the Russian active measures. And this is the tragedy, a conservative family in Washington County, Utah, the Robinsons have this son that becomes radicalized and shoots this wonderful man, Charlie Kirk, in this terrible way, this graphic way that is so disturbing. It just makes you sick at heart. I mean, as an American, it was so sickened by this because this shouldn't be in our country. We can't have this violence against each other, and it is what the President Trump said was true. Although a lot of people on the left attacked him, he said, "You've been calling us fascists and Hitler for years. You people on the right, you leftist professors, you academics, you the people from the squad, in Congress." And I'm glad that, in a sense, you had Bernie Sanders and you had AOC saying there's no place for violence in America. Good. I'm glad. I hope you mean it. But you see, you can't call people Hitler, and you can't call them fascists when it's not even true. And when you have these institutions which are forming young people, repeating it, these young people will be malformed. They will adopt this totalitarian mindset where they believe violence is okay. And it's the same thing on the right when Alex Jones is shouting, "It's war, it's war, it's war," he is doing the same thing on the right that the left has done. This is how you get to a civil war, by the way. You have people on both sides eager to say there's a war, wanting a civil war. There was a book I reviewed. Now it was, I don't know, the year 2000. It was called Civil War II. It was written, I think it was written by a Southerner. I reviewed the book, and the author, very much objected to my review because they said, no, we don't want this in America. We don't want this. Even talking about civil war can become a kind of a subtle way of urging it on, right? Because I sensed the author really was kind of looking forward to a civil war. Let me tell you, you don't want civil war in your country. It might be inevitable. It might be cathartic, but you don't want it. You don't want this violence. You don't want your own. The most vicious kind of war there is a civil war, where countrymen are killing countrymen. Look at the American Civil War. That was the most bloody, horrible war in American history. Bloodier for us in World War II or World War I. And it took nearly a million dead and wounded Americans. It was horrific. You don't want that. There's got to be another way. And I think if you look at Lincoln, Lincoln didn't want it. He inevitably embraced it, but nobody wanted it, except for a few fanatics in the South who thought they could carve an independent country. And this is the problem. The people that want the war, that start the war, that divide and accept the division and accept the violence, they're the ones that lose the war. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think we had a show once where I titled it A Tale of Two Americas, if I remember correctly. And it was about this idea that influencers were pushing of civil war and then breaking up the country into two. So you would have the right-wing America, or the right-wing states, and you would have the left-wing states.
Red state, blue state, yeah.
Yeah, and so one thing would just devolve into this woke wonderland of horrors, where nobody is allowed to have a gun, nobody's allowed to have a real car, and everything must be under surveillance, and the kids are being raised by with lunatic concepts, and it was just and they wouldn't be accepting of any masculinity or any thought that they didn't like. And this other America could or may not devolve into something that's also not really American. And so we ran the scenario, and I mean from the perspective of Russia and the perspective of China, from their perspective, it would be interesting to break up the U.S.
Oh, it would be to their advantage. They're the winners.
Because they could play both sides. They could play both of these new American states and say Russia could schmooze with the right-wing U.S. and say, oh, no, now we can merge because we're more similar now.
We can fight a world civil war together.
Yeah, we can do anything. We can achieve anything. And the Chinese may work with the leftist United States and say, together
Black Lives Matter and Antifa.
Together we can run the world and we can take it all over. And
well, this is where you get mass formation going on. To borrow the term from Matthias Desmet, who wrote the book The Psychology of Totalitarianism, very much sort of imitating Gustave Le Bon's work, continuing it. A Belgian psychologist, I believe. A very excellent book. And mass formation is when the 30% of unthinking people who belong to the crowd, who adopt ideas along ideological lines that are not thinking and not processing properly, who have these leaders who are basically essentially opportunists and criminals. When that becomes consolidated, it consolidates at the expense of the 10% of organic real leaders who will wisely guide, away from the danger zone. And if you look at the left, it's long been totalitarian in its tendency, and it has long been a mass formation. The right, the conservatives and the Republican Party have really checked that for many years, but now are becoming that through MAGA. And there's this, I think it's about a third of the MAGA movement is, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson, Douglas McGregor, these people who are completely, there's something corrupt, dirty, mindless, and the people that follow it are corrupted by it. And they're appealing to this lowest common denominator, this emotionalism that you see with Michael Savage, for example, other pro-Russian voices on the right, and Napolitano. Look, there's so many of them you could name, and that intelligence that's required in leadership, that prudence, is X'd out. This is how you get. And why is it totalitarian? Because it's now off the rails. There is no longer a thought process. There's no longer a give and take. There's no longer debate, because you have to go along with whatever the mob wants, and the mob is fueled by the demagogues. This is a death ride, right? Whether it was the death ride of Hitler or Stalin, it's a death ride for millions of people. And in the United States, it is what the Russians and the Chinese are hoping is going to consolidate on both sides of this divide.
Yeah, it's like the left typically accused the right of brainwashing the children, from a very early age on. The flag and church and values and whatnot, and the hobbies, the shooting and brainwashing these kids. But how much brainwashing did we see? Brainwashing of children by the left, when they feel like they're in their own home, and now they have a sense of control, and they completely abuse and misuse their control that they have over their own children. Just feeding them garbage food because they believe, proper food would turn them into conservatives and fascists and imperialist pigs. And even just denying their children baseline masculinity or femininity. Some of these wokies, they would just terrorize their own children and tell them to, put on a dress, damn it. And then when the children comply or they think nothing of it, then some of these parents will actually feel so proud because now they have a trans child or a non-binary child, and then they're so happy and they're so proud. Guess what they would feel like if their children refused and said, "No, I think I'm a classical boy," or "I think I'm a classical girl." These parents would go bonkers. They would go bananas and just use all kinds of manipulation on their children. And even the typical left thought police, when these leftists, they thought police each other and even themselves, when they would stop at certain thoughts. And this is why it's important, when Kirk was going around to these campuses and speaking to people directly, and sometimes, even if these people didn't agree on something, it's hard to, I think from face to face in a somewhat civilized setting, I think it's hard to not see the common ground and say, okay, we don't have to do anything stupid, anything violent, just because we disagree on something. So there's a lot of brainwashing going on, kind of grooming the next generation of communists and potentially violent people. When this sort of mindset happens, sometimes people raise their children a certain way and then they go off to college and they become different, which might have been the case with this suspected killer. We saw this throughout history. Communist history, when people had, especially in Europe, which was for the longest time super conservative, right? So they had this upbringing, but then they go to college and then they get ensnared. They get lured into something different, and then they become something else. And this was exactly that age that the suspect is at. Is suspect in the killing of Charlie Kirk. You mentioned this before in this episode. It's this college age. The colleges is where it's at, because now you're not at home. You're not under supervision by your parents. You're not in contact with your family and their values. you're not in contact with your previous community. Now you're somewhere else in a big city, and now you can do things that you didn't do before. You can entertain thoughts that you couldn't entertain before. There's people that seem like different and maybe interesting, and so that's something we've seen before a lot. I mean, even the famous Adam Weishaupt from the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati. I mean, he had this super strict Catholic upbringing, which he didn't like, and then he got he had these very tight contacts with these very serious Enlightenment groups, right? And some of them were very radical, and so then he created the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, and and the French still suspect these groups of playing a role in inciting the problems, in France, which then became the revolution, because this is what professionals do. You get new people, and you get some established people in your organization, and you run some operations, and it goes against. These members sometimes they become different than what they were before, because that they can change completely. So we'll see in time the internet history of the suspect, and maybe people talking to the FBI about maybe suspicions of mental issues or what, maybe depression or something. And this is also something that malicious groups would try to use when they recruit someone. If somebody has psychological problems, this all sometimes can be used to the advantage of this professional group. If people they don't see a future for themselves, they might want to go out with a big bang, and they want to carve their name into history and be remembered somehow. This was called, in the old internet era, this was called trying to be an hero, not a hero, but jokingly they would not have the correct spelling and say, oh, somebody tried to be an hero, and basically commit suicide or just go out with a bang and die by the hands of the police, essentially.
Yeah, well, there's this conspiracy theory fanatics. I think of Bill Cooper, who died at the death by police. Very strange character in the UFO conspiracy world. You have these people, you have a kind of rebellion and an irrationalism and a resentment and alienation that makes these ideologies. Look at how Hitler might have turned out if he'd been killed in the Munich beer hall push. Would have been another, example of a lunatic.
Oh yeah, and there were even possible assassinations very early on when he was very early in his political days, because he would always frequent the same places in Munich, eating cake usually. Always the same table, always the same places, and I think there was a
coffee houses.
Yeah, possible. There was this research on some communists that had the idea of putting a bomb where he would normally sit, and this is very early in Hitler's career, but somebody decided against it.
Well, one time Hitler even recounted this in Table Talk. They got lost and they drove into a communist neighborhood where there were armed communists everywhere, and they were looking for directions, and he, of course, he was riding in the back seat, and it was like if anybody had recognized him, it would have been, it was very dangerous in Weimar Germany when the left and the right were fighting in the streets. But, maybe we should. We're probably running out of time, but that would have been a great example to get into
the Weimar era, and also especially in Prussia, the eastern part of Germany.
We're all Weimar. We're all in Weimar now, right?
Yeah, the battles in the street, the battles in the street, and then martial law type structures, and people tearing each other apart over this stupid ideology.
And the communists really were playing the scissors strategy with the right and the left, and Stalin allowed the right to win. He allowed Hitler to win, allowed him to become chancellor.
The German left was freaking out, because they would say, we have the capabilities to commit larger terror attacks. We have the capabilities to try something serious. Why doesn't Moscow let us? Why doesn't Moscow give the orders? And so
because the French and the British wouldn't have allowed it, they would have intervened.
Yeah,
Russia was not in a condition to intervene itself, and
so
the Polish regime was strong.
So leading German
they went
communists,
with Nazis.
So leading German communists, they would travel to Moscow, or they would be called to Moscow. And they would be told either directly by Stalin or through intermediaries. They were told, don't do anything really big against the Nazis. Small stuff, yes, which kind of helped the Nazis' popularity. Smaller stuff, yes. Nothing big. We have this idea that when the Nazis come to power, the Nazis will mess everything up, and the Nazis will then lose power. The Nazis may even smash the bourgeoisie for us, and then it all goes into a downward spiral. Yeah. And then we do the communist. Right. Then we do the communist takeover.
The communist revolution, right? Stalin's word for Hitler was the icebreaker of the revolution, and I can't help asking you now, in America, with so many people on the far right, people that are quite irresponsible. Calling for smashing the left in the United States and taking away their rights and so on, and really no regard for the Constitution. I mean, God knows the Dark Enlightenment people, what people like Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin are going to say. Yarvin's very careful, by the way. I don't think he'll do this, but it'll be sneaky the way he says it. But, kind of like, and then people on the left reacting, wait a minute, this is a Reichstag fire moment, that they'll use the assassination of, and of course, so when you read the Nazi biographies, it seems like you can't find any evidence. It does seem that the Reichstag fire was a kind of freaky event. I mean, do you think Goering really was behind it, as some people have theorized?
I think it's highly likely that the Nazis wanted this to happen to gain kind of the upper hand in the weeks and months leading up to the...
But were they behind it? I mean, nobody's found any evidence yet in all these years. Were they behind it?
Well, there were... I mean, unfortunately, those authors, or more scientific authors, who accused the Nazis of torching the Reichstag building, a lot of these authors were leftist and biased. Well,
very virulently anti-Nazi,
biased and manipulative. Yeah. I mean, there's even some some people, they love to draw this comparison later between the Reichstag fire and the
original
9/11
false flag event, right? The original
9/11 and say, well, the Bush, the Republicans are really saying the Republicans are really Nazis, and so this is going to be a Nazi-like takeover of the Bush administration. And so this is the problem.
And that did not happen. I mean, George W. Bush wasn't a Nazi, right?
Well, it's like it was all neat and tidy for the target audience, but it was vastly different types of events and situations, and also so this is kind of the bias that made quite a few people disregard some of the works that have been written about it.
I mean, of course, Hitler used the Enabling Act, and they used it, of course, perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, the Nazis did kind of need. the Nazis did
And they
kind of
did need
need a
it,
final
yeah.
push. They were
Yeah.
stretched out financially as it was, and the support
But were
was
they
kind of
smart
waning.
enough and organized enough to actually have done it?
Well,
Would they have dared?
according to various investigations, I mean, some of them were done in exile, and it's just complicated and not very
How do you do
super
an
reliable.
investigation in
But
exile?
some of these investigations, based on available info, which was limited, some of these investigations they pointed towards the speed in which the fire developed and how it must have started at different places in the right timing, must have been these right places to get the fire going so quickly, and maybe even some substances were used to accelerate the fire. I mean, this is very speculative. And of course, the security aspect, why wasn't this prevented? I mean, where was security? Then there's all this debate about the underground tunnels, with the access, different types of access to the building. I mean, the Nazis could have done a bunch of different things. I mean, they could have done a false flag terror campaign. They could have assassinated some beloved figure, and there was certainly possibilities. But it's just
The only theory that really made sense. I mean, if you look at the testimony, they were having a party. Most of the Nazis were having a party, and it was. If you read the Ernst Hamstangel's, Putzi Hamstangel's account, he was terribly sick. He had the flu at the time. And so he calls over, he can't attend the party. He calls over and Goebbels picks up the phone. And because he could see from his apartment, the Reichstag was burning. He could see it. He was sick as a dog, but he could see it. He said, "Did you know the Reichstag is burning?" And Goebbels thought he was making a joke, and started laughing and handed the phone to somebody else. It's like, Hamstangel's being crazy again. And they were, he said, there's no way they were faking. They were genuinely surprised. But, Goering wasn't at the party, and he was the first one on the scene. And so if any Nazi did it, and maybe didn't tell the other Nazis because there was a need to know, and he really organized a lot of the police. He became the head of the police in Prussia. And so there was like persuasive, the only persuasive argument is that Goering did it.
Yeah, and there was something,
and we'll never know because he was actually competent. He had the highest IQ in the Third Reich, and he might have actually done it. And so that would be the only way. Yeah,
I remember something. What was it? The Gestapo or the guy who would later ultimately lead the Gestapo. Was his name Diels? I don't remember exactly. There was
Diels. Yeah, and he was there. He was in the police administration.
I think there was a previous thing going on in Prussia where the people in charge of security, maybe it was even Diels himself or one of his people. They sort of
Diels later fell out with the Nazis.
Yeah. And he had hidden evidence against the Nazis stashed away someplace
to keep himself alive.
Yeah, as his insurance. But I think he buried him in Switzerland. Who knows where it ended up? And but there was
he would have had to put it with a lawyer in Switzerland, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but there was I think there was an episode connected to him somehow where in Prussia somebody in charge of security allowed stupid demonstrations which were almost guaranteed to end up in massive violence, and I think that was done on purpose to then have a Nazi takeover, a real Nazi takeover of Prussia, which for quite a while tried to be outside of the Nazi control. This is very early on. And it's like it's we cannot tell certain things for sure. I mean, of course, the Nazis would have loved playing dirty, using dirty tricks. But the communists, they would have loved to burn things and assassinate people and cause mayhem and have a takeover. I mean, the communists actually expected a communist takeover of Germany in 1923. This was at the earliest stages of the Nazi Party, the NSDAP. everything was ready. The guns were stashed away, and the communist structure was there. And they would just, even the communist propaganda from the East was already saying it's coming, it's happening, it's going to happen. But then the orders got changed. It was no, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it. You just play ball. And this shocked many communists, and even this red propaganda czar, Willy Münzenberg, he became more and more unnerved by the actions of Moscow, especially with the pact between the Nazis and the Soviets, and he tried to salvage things and do things, defying orders from Moscow. And so Moscow was trying to recall him, come back to Moscow and just work over there in propaganda, but he wouldn't go. He was going into hiding, and eventually the communists caught him and killed him because he wasn't following the orders.
Sorry, Munzenberg was being summoned to Moscow, and he wouldn't come because he knew he would be disappeared, right?
Yeah, and he was pleading. He was writing all these letters. I'm the original communist. I was with the original gangsters.
He was with Lenin and Dzerzhinsky formulating their plans, and
I'm one of the original guys. How can you not?
He really, what they attribute to the Italian Gramsci was really Gramsci's very badly taken notes on what Munzenberg was lecturing about in the communist schools in Moscow at the end of the during the Russian Civil War period and shortly after. So it was because Gramsci went to Moscow and got schooled there by them in their revolutionary schools. So, and Munzenberg was one of the lecturers there. So anyway, well, we've covered so much ground. I want to thank everybody for being with us on another edition of Friends and Enemies. And I'm Jeff Nyquist. My co-host has been Alex Benesch. And thanks for being with us. We'll be back next week, I think.